Hi everyone, in today's video we're going to be taking a close-up look at the new Stencil and Stamp tool from Sizzix. I've just received mine, you can see it's still in the box, so I'm going to unpack it, show you what you get in the box and then show you how to use it. I've seen this demonstrated by Pete. I've watched some of the videos, and Josh showed me it last time I was at the Sizzix offices, but this is the first time I've got my hands on one. So this video really is going to be me using it for the first time, which hopefully is going to give you confidence that it's very easy to use, because I literally am taking this out the packet and getting straight into the video. So what do you get in the box? You get the stencil platform. You've got a set of instructions there in lots of different languages, so that's handy to refer back to. This turquoise piece is the piece that holds your stencil in place. And then the clear lid is for stamping with. When you're stenciling, that clear lid lifts out of the hinges because you don't need that when you're using the stencil part. The bottom has got some foam underneath, so it gives you a good surface when you are stamping. The clear lid has got a grid on it, and the other thing that you get with this is some sticky grid. You get one A4 sheet of sticky grid, which you place on the base of the platform is plastic. You place the sticky grid on there, and that enables you to do your stenciling whilst holding your card in place. So the lid lifts out, as you can see. I can pop that to one side, and then I can grab my piece of sticky grid. I'm just showing you how this fits in first. So the stencil tool slots over the hinges as such. So where your clear lid would sit, you've got those little rectangles. These are great because it enables you to move your stencils up and down depending on where you want your image on your card. And these are the stencils. You can see they've got holes pre-punched in them, so you can move those around. The platform itself is plastic, so it's white clean. I am going to pop sticky grid on this. The sticky grid is an optional extra. You don't have to pop it on, but it's really useful because what this is going to do, this platform isn't magnetic, so it's the sticky grid that's going to hold your cardstock in place while you work, either while you're stamping or while you're stenciling. Great for those of us like me who actually find the magnets a bit of a pain to use. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pop my sticky grid on. And there is no top and bottom to this really, but I've just realised that there is a little Sizzix logo and I want that at the bottom. So I'm going to peel from the top. The sticky grid is sticky on both sides. So I'm peeling away the release paper from the back, and I'm just going to lift it down a little. I'm not peeling it all off. That way I can just stick it at the very top to make sure it's straight, and then peel off the rest of the release paper and sort of push it down as I go. I'm hoping this is going to give me the best bubble-free application of it. So I'm just going to use my pokey tool to take the release paper off the front of the sticky grid. Now the sticky grid you would leave on your platform. They are replaceable. Obviously this is brand new to me, so for me this is my first time using it, so it's lovely and sticky, but eventually it will lose its stick and you'll need to pop a new one on. Pete did mention in his video the other day that he's been using his over 50 times and it's still going, so I'd imagine these will last quite some time before you need to buy another one. But popping that released sheet back over it when you store it will help keep dust and pet hairs off it. So obviously you want to extend the life of it as much as possible. So I've taken off the clear lid, and this is the piece where your stencil is going to sit on. You've got the option here. There are no edges to this platform, so you can use whatever size cardstock you want. You're not limited as with other platforms, you know, where there might be an edge where you would be butting your cardstock up against the edge to ensure it's in the same place. With this, it's the grid that's holding it, so there's no need for an edge, and that means you can use whatever size you want and then cut your cardstock down afterwards. So I'm going to line up, this is watercolour card, and I'm just lining it up with one of the lines on the grid, and then I've got the choice of where I want to put my stencil. You can move this across and up and down. So, and here's some of the stencils. I'll just show you the ones I've got so far. Lovely Snowflake. I've got a tartan or a plaid, depending on where you are in the world. I love this kingfisher one, and then the butterfly. Each stencil set, it shows you quite clearly on the front what each stencils as such, and each is numbered. So with this butterfly set, this is 4, then the next one's 3, 2 and 1. So there's four stencils in this set, and stencil 1, you can see from the packaging, is going to do the background for me. You can leave out any of the images if you want to. Say you could use the background on its own if you want to, with other stencils or with other stamping, or you can use the butterfly without the background. So the fact that they're separate stencils obviously gives you a lot of scope for the designs that you might want to make. So I'm just going to pop that onto my stencil tool. The cardstock is held in place with the sticky grid, and that turquoise tool is holding my stencil exactly in the same place. And I can move it up or down till I get it exactly where I want on the cardstock before I start inking. So now I'm ready to start stenciling. So I'm going to grab some inks and we'll dive right in. And with the stenciling, it's really personal choice as to what inks you want to use. I'm going to use my distress ink cubes, and I'm going to use brushes. You can use an ink blending tool if you prefer. I like to use a combination of all of those things actually. And for the background, I'm going to kind of copy the colouring from the packaging. Whenever I get new die sets, or in this case new stencil sets, for the first time I use anything, I always find it's far easier to sort of copy the packaging basically, and then from there decide where you want to play around with different colour schemes and things. Copying the packaging always gets you off to a good start, and you can see kind of how it all works before you then start making other choices. So I've got Twisted Citron. You can see here the edge of this design is relatively close to the edge of the stencil. If you're a bit heavy-handed and you're a bit worried about going over the edge, you could always put masking tape down the side of the stencil. I'm not going to worry about that because I'm going to be trimming this down. These stencils are quite large. The finished design is about kind of 14-15 centimetres square. So for me, that's pretty much going to take up the card front on its own. So I'm not going to worry if I get ink either side of the stencil because I know I'm going to trim it down. But obviously if that concerns you, just pop some masking tape down the side. And you can see I'm going over this fairly lightly to begin with. I can lift this off at any point to see where I'm at. So that's the beauty of this. Go in lightly, build up your layers, because once you've put too much ink on, you can't get it off. But of course you can always add more. And I can take this off, have a look at how it's progressing. And then when I pop my stencil back on those two holes, it's going to be in the exact same position. The surface of the stencil itself is a lovely shiny finish. It's really easy to wipe clean, but it also means that your ink's going to just sit on there when you've got ink sort of on the edges. So you can start off on the stencil itself and then bring your ink in onto the cardstock. So this is great for areas where you want to maybe add a bit of darkness, a bit of depth. Start on your stencil and then you can use up that ink that's sitting on the stencil by kind of bringing it onto the card. So I've just gone along the very top edge with a darker green, and of course it's great, I can lift the stencil on and off to check how that looks before I move on to the next colour. So I'm happy with that for the top, and I think we're going to move on then. I'm going to bring this down into a yellow. And I'm going to do kind of the same as I did with the greens really. Start with a relatively dark yellow. So I've got fossilised amber here, which is quite a nice sort of dark mustardy almost colour. And I'm going to overlap a little bit with the green. This is a really strong yellow. And then I'll sort of fade it down into a lighter yellow. And you'll notice I'm still using quite a large brush here. If you're more comfortable with a smaller brush, of course you can switch into a more detailed brush for the sort of more intricate areas. And of course, if you prefer, you can also use an ink blending tool if that's what you prefer. So I'm switching now to Squeeze Lemonade, which is a lighter yellow. And I'm going to do the same again. I'm going to kind of overlap a little I'm just using a bit of kitchen towel to get some of that darker yellow off my brush before I go in. And then I'm doing the same again, overlapping with the darker shade. I don't generally clean my brushes. I find that just giving them a good wipe off on kitchen towel is enough. If I've been using oxide inks and then I'm switching to distress inks, then I do really make sure I've got all the oxide ink off my brush, just on the dry kitchen towel. But you do want to make sure that you don't use your brush with oxide ink on a normal distress ink, because the oxide's a pigment, it will kind of sit on top and you will contaminate the top of your ink pad and mix the colours a little. So I am very careful with that, but other than that I don't tend to wash my brushes. I've got separate brushes for each colour family. And actually the only time I ever wash my brushes is when I take them to classes and people use the wrong colour with the wrong brush. So I kind of have to wash them then to get the staining off. But generally, kitchen towel's all I ever use. So I've got all my colours on now, and the beauty of this is I can lift this off and see what it looks like. And if I need to, I can go back in and add a bit more shading here and there if I'm not happy with it. But I think that looks lovely. So now we're ready to move on to the next layer. And when you're using inks with stencils, you don't have to rush to clean them. That lovely glossy surface means that this is going to be quite easy to wipe clean just with a baby wipe. Obviously, if you're putting texture paste or anything like that, you want to get it off straight away before it dries. But with inks, I can just pop those to one side until I've done with all my stenciling and then clean them all together. So this is the next layer, and this is kind of just the outline of the butterfly really. And when I look at the packaging photo, this part of the stenciling is almost looks white. I can see it's just got a little bit of light blue really. So I think what I'm going to do for this layer is just go in around the edges with a light colour. On that packaging it looks like it's blue. I think I'm going to go in with a very pale lilac, just to give a hint of colour to that first layer. And then the next layers of the butterfly are where all the detail is, and that's where I can go in with my darker shades. So I'm looking at my lilacs, and milled lavender is the lightest shade I've got in the cubes. I haven't got all of the cubes actually. So I'm just going to go in. I'm checking on the stencil before I actually go onto the cardstock to make sure that's not sort of overloaded with ink. And I'm working my way around the edge, barely noticeable really, and that's what I'm going for this layer. I'm not going to do the centre, I'm just going to work my way around the edges. And you'll notice I'm sort of taking the brush onto the stencil, so it gives less of a harsh edge if you do that. So I'm just working my way around in kind of a circular motion around all the edges. So a very light look to this layer. So when I lift this up, you'll see it's actually more noticeable than it looks, the colour. It's subtle, but it's very clear which part is the butterfly. So that's the look I was going for. So I'm going to pop that back. Now we've got 2 more layers to the butterfly. The next one I'm going to move up to sort of the next darkness of shade, if that makes sense. So for this one I'm going to pick a slightly darker shade. I've got quite a selection here. I've got Seedless Preserves and Dusty Concord. Yeah, Dusty Concord. But I'm going to go for Victorian Velvet for this layer, and then I think I'll save the Dusty Concord and the Seedless Preserves for the final layer, because I think for the final layer I'm going to want 2. So I've grabbed Victorian Velvet for this one. I have also grabbed the light milled lavender, just in case I feel I want to add some of that to this layer. This Victorian Velvet is a nice sort of pinky lilac shade, and I think it's going to look lovely against the lighter background. And again, I'm working in a circular motion, and I'm kind of covering all of this. You do want to be careful on some stencils where you've got, like on this layer, I have got some pieces where there are quite intricate areas. You want to be careful not to be too sort of vigorous with your brush and lift those, because obviously you'll get ink underneath if you do that. So I'm just going to have a look at that. Now I'm happy with that as a sort of all round, but I feel it needs a bit more depth. So what I'm going to do is pop my stencil back on, and I'm going to grab a more detailed brush, because I've used that large brush to give a good overall even colour. I can go back in with the same colour, but using a detailed brush is just going to darken it in areas, and that's going to give me the shade variation that I kind of feel this needs. The brushes I'm using here are Lisa Horton brushes. They come in a pack of 3 in 3 different sizes that are all quite small and detailed. So they're really, really useful for stencils. So I'm working my way around. I'm being careful not to cover all of the areas with this darker shade, because obviously the idea of this is to get some variation. So I'm trying to just concentrate on the edges of each area. And of course I can lift this up to see if I've got enough depth there. I think this area at the bottom still looks a little bit light, so I'm just going to add a little bit more ink to this area. And then we'll be ready to move on to the next layer. I'm darkening the colour in the centre as well before I move on. There we go. So you can see that's given it a bit of variation. So now I'm ready for the final layer. And this one you can see has got some quite large areas. And this is where I'm going to bring in 2 different colours, because there are quite large open areas on this one. So by having 2 different shades, it's going to give it some real depth. So on this layer, as mentioned before, I'm going to use Dusty Concord and Seedless Preserves. I'm going to use Dusty Concord first. This is a nice, well, as the name says, a dusky sort of shade. It's quite a muted tone, whereas the Seedless Preserves has got quite a bit of pink to it. So that's going to be more vibrant than this shade. So what I'm going to do is I'm using my larger brush again, and I'm going to go all over with this shade. And then I'm going to use the Seedless Preserves to give me my variation. So with this one I'm going quite lightly really. I'm going with a nice sort of blended look to this by going all over with the bigger brush. And you can see I'm really making sure I cover all of this, because this is kind of my base layer for this layer of the stencil. I want to make sure I've covered everything. And of course I can lift it off and check before I move on to the next colour. Now you can see on this design, they're quite large areas that I've done all of this colour. So we definitely need some variation here, which I'm going to do with the Seedless Preserves. And I'm going back to my smaller brush because I want to just highlight certain areas. So you can see how going in with the detail brush, you really get a lot of ink in quite quickly. And I'm picking up the ink. Where I've gone in, I've got quite a lot of ink on top of the stencil, so I'm not going to waste that. Where I do get lots of ink in the stencil, you'll see me sort of using the brush to sweep that onto the cardstock from the stencil. And I'm going to work my way, I'm going to make sure I go around all the edges with this darker shade, because that's going to really let this layer sort of stand out. And then I'm just going to add more detail sort of to the centre of each area as well. You want to make sure you don't put too much of this on, because obviously I don't want to completely cover the layer before. You want the different layers to show. And of course I can have a quick check and go back in if I need to on any areas. But you can see how that really brings out the design by having, with each layer, the different shades again within that level of stenciling. So it really brings out the design nicely. And you can see you end up with lots of different colours, because you end up with the two colours you've used, but then another colour where they've kind of overlapped and blended. So it's really fabulous. So if I'm making this into a card, my next step would be a sentiment. And the beauty of this tool is that, of course, it's a stamp platform as well. So I can leave my cardstock stuck on the sticky grid, take off the stencil tool part, and then add my clear lid on. And the clear lid has got a nice grid on there, which is going to enable me to line up my stamps to make sure they're straight. And Sizzix have a whole range of stamps that work really well with all of these stencil designs. They're designed by Pete Hughes, and the series is called Sunnyside. So there's Sunnyside 1, 2, 3, etc. So I've grabbed one of the sentiments from this set. Now I haven't used these stamps before, so I know this is clean, and that means I can pop it straight on to my project and work out where I want it. And then all I need to do is bring the lid down to pick it up. So I've inked that up with black ink, and then I can bring it down, put some pressure on to stamp. And the beauty is, if it's not completely crisp, which is not, I can go in again, or I can even turn it around and add some more ink and double stamp if I want to. So let's do that. So I will grab my ink again. And if you feel like you've got any areas that you've missed, you can go back in. Equally, if you wanted to do any sort of effects, like perhaps ombre stamping, if you want a variation in colour, you can do that. You can just keep going back. I would recommend actually looking up on YouTube techniques for stamp platforms, because there are lots of different things, such as repeat stamping of an image, lots of different techniques that you can do with a stamp platform. You know, I'm just keeping it quite simple for this video, just to show you how this works. But there are lots more things you can do with a stamp platform beyond just stamping your sentiments. Now, because this stamp is brand new, I have found that it's missed a little bit. So I'm just going in to add a bit more ink where it skipped. Again, the beauty of a stamp platform. So then I can press that down and make sure I've got a nice crisp image. Now I'm quite happy with this, and I'm ready to make this into a card. But say, for example, I wasn't happy with any part of that stenciling, I could very easily bring my stencil tool back in, pop that in the same place, and pop my stencil back on and add more ink if I wanted to, or add more colours. Again, with stamping, I could go back in, because that piece of card is still in the same place. So because I'm happy, I'm going to take that off, and now I can get this mounted onto a card front. I will show you the finished card at the end. I'll pop a photo. But before I finish this video, there is one more thing I wanted to cover, because it's a question I've seen a lot of people asking, and that is whether you can use the cling type stamps with this platform, or is it just the clear stamps? And the answer is yes, you can use cling stamps with this platform. However, this platform wasn't necessarily designed for cling stamps. Unlike other stamp platforms, the hinge in this is set, and of course the bottom is completely flat. There's no kind of adjustment. With other platforms, you've got like a foam insert, so you can alter the depth. With this, you've got the plastic base and your clear lid, and the gap between them is the same. So if I were to place a thick rubber stamp at the top of this, it really is going to push the bottom way out from the platform. So basically you're going to get a lot of pressure on the top part of that stamp and not on the bottom. However, if I move my stamp to the bottom of the platform, there's a tiny gap. So you're going to get a pretty even pressure as long as you're towards the bottom of the platform, away from the hinge. So yes, unless you're using really huge stamps that take up most of the platform, for the most part, you're going to get by fine with this platform and your cling stamps. So to demonstrate, I'll quickly ink this up and show you how nicely it stamps. There we go. So you can see a lovely crisp image. So yes, it's going to work nicely with your cling stamps, provided you put them towards the bottom of the platform. There we go. You can see that stamped beautifully. So once you finish crafting, I would recommend popping the release paper back on top of the sticky grid just to protect it from dust. And then the clear lid is also going to protect it as well, of course. And the stencil tool, there are two little pegs at the top you can see there. So that slots in there underneath your lid, so it's all stored away nicely and it will keep nice and clean. There's just one more thing I want to cover in this video, because I know it's another question you'll all have, and that is, how would you use stencils that aren't Sizzix stencils with this tool, because obviously they won't have the holes in the right place to line up on the peg system. They're very easy to use with this, so I'm just going to talk about the accessories. We have already mentioned about the sticky grids. The sticky grid obviously is sticky, so that is going to enable you, perhaps with some stencils, to just stick your stencil around the edges to the grid to line it up. You will get a sticky grid with your tool. You can buy a pack of 5 in addition, so I would recommend, if you are going for the tool, grab yourself a pack of extra sticky grids, then you've got them. They will last a while, but eventually once they lose their stick, you'll want to freshen up and add a new one. And then this is what is going to enable you, if you want to use other stencils with your tool with the pegs, this is an adapter. So you would pop, I forgot to take my lid off it, you're going to pop your stencil tool in place over the hinge system, and then this is like a plastic piece with the holes, so that slots on top of there, and then you've got an adhesive strip so that you can attach this to your stencil. I find it easier to attach my stencil to the adhesive strip while it's on the tool, because I can sort of use the grid as well at the same time to just make sure I'm completely straight. I've also noticed with my stencils, they really vary in how much border you get around the cutout design, as to how much room you've got for this strip. You can put your stencil as high up or low up on this adapter as you want to. So if you do have a stencil where the design comes quite close to the edge, you can still line it up so that you're not covering any of your design with the strip, if that makes sense. I find it easier also to stick it on while it's on the tool, because you can sort of use the grid to make sure you're sticking your stencil on straight. So that's what I'm going to do here. Now, once you've stuck this on, the choice is yours as to whether you want to just leave that on your stencil permanently. That's what I would do, to be perfectly honest. You get 10 in the pack of adapters. They're relatively inexpensive, so I probably will just buy adapters for all of my stencils that I want to use. If you don't want to do that, you could peel your stencil back off this and keep hold of the little piece of release paper that was covering the adhesive. And once you've peeled your stencil off, you can always pop that back on. I hope I've covered everything you need to know in this video, but if you do have any questions, just leave a comment below and I'll come back to you as soon as I see it. I'm hoping to make some more videos with more different ideas and inspiration for using the tool, so please subscribe to my channel if you don't already, as hopefully I'll have some more ideas for you. I'll also add to the description box links to all the products I've used. Thanks for watching and joining me today, and hopefully I'll see you soon.